Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be chatting through my favorite books of the year so far. This is going to be separate from my favorite new fantasy releases. Because I talk about new releases for fantasy so often, I wanted to have a dedicated space to mention my top books, to really highlight the ones that I think are standouts. And then also by having these be separate, it allows me to talk about rereads, books in other genres, and then also not just books but manga as well. And I'm going to start with a manga, and that would be Hat Atelier. So like a lot of the ones on today's list, you have likely heard me talk about these already and potentially heard me talk about them at length. That's very true for this one. I started it at the end of last year, and then this year I have caught up with everything that is out. If you have read it and you want to hear spoilers, I do have a couple discussion videos over on my side channel, so I'll have those linked. But if you know nothing about Hat Atelier, for one, the artwork is stunning. I always mention the art when I talk about this series because truly, every panel is so breathtaking. The character designs are magnificent. The variety in their hairstyles, in what they're wearing, I guess you could say the grandeur of the settings they just are fantastic, and it captures this whimsical, magical feel without even hearing anything about the story. Truly, just the artwork itself is captivating. So for that alone, I would recommend this series. But the story it starts out very cozy and it starts out very sweet. It feels low stakes. And then as it progresses, it starts to hit on some almost philosophical debates, and it really gets a lot of depth to it. So it just has that full range. Whenever I have something that becomes a new favorite, it's often the types of stories that can capture the full range of emotions. It can pull you back and forth between laughing, it's happy, it's cozy, it's cute, and then also it's sad, it's heartbreaking. It makes you question what you think about certain things. It makes you question the main characters and the characters that you're rooting for, and then it makes you question your principles, and it does all of these things, and you probably wouldn't expect that looking at this sweet little innocent cover. So the setup for the story is we follow this young girl named Coco, who she would love to be able to use magic, but she believes magic will always be something that she can never attain, that she can never have for herself, that she can never perform, because in their world, in order to use magic, you have to be born with this ability, and Coco doesn't have that ability. But then one day, a witch comes into her town, and she witnesses them using magic, and then everything she's ever known kind of gets flipped on its head. And as she's starting to learn more about magic, as she's learning about the rules of magic, the history of magic, even once she starts to learn about it, then she starts to question what she's learned about it. And it really is absolutely fantastic. I cannot recommend it enough. Obviously, that's going to be true for basically everything, because I'm going to love everything, but Witch Hat, truly, absolutely, absolutely wonderful. After that, we have a contemporary fiction, and that would be Maame. This story follows a young woman who her father is very, very ill and requires a lot of assistance. She has essentially put her life on hold to help him, and she is essentially the only family member who's really putting in a lot of effort to help care for her father. And what this takes, how much of her time and energy and effort that is required of her, she really doesn't have the ability to live for herself, to live her own life, to, as cheesy as it sounds, discover herself. And this book, it has so many themes within it that I found I resonated with quite a bit, specifically the caretaker aspects of the story, as well as the grieving that occurs, just how it feels to grieve, and how all-consuming it can feel, and how you're expected to still go about your everyday life, how you're still expected to function like a normal human being when you are just questioning everything, when you're in so much pain, when you're numb. Sometimes it's not even pain, it's just numbness. It affects you every waking moment. It affects you when you're sleeping. It affects your ability to sleep. It affects your ability to operate on any level. It's just always there. And it's captured so exceptionally well in this story. It was very emotional to read. There were a number of times where I just really had to power through because I was getting quite emotional. Obviously, not everybody is going to have that personal connection to what is going on in this story, but because of, I mean, a lot of us, a big part of what draws us to books and a big part of what ends up determining books that are our favorites are the ones that can hit something within us, that can make us feel seen, that can capture a feeling, a moment. It can capture something, and it just ends up resonating. And that was very much the case with this story. I've never read a book that captures all of the things that that this one did. Next up, we have a very cute story, so, you know, a palate cleanser after the heaviness of Maame, and that would be A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting. One of you recommended this to me and kind of was like, you know what, I'll give that one a go. It sounds kind of cute. It reminded me in its description of the book Half a Soul, and I really liked that one from last year. This one is not fantasy whatsoever, but it does have that Regency feel to it. We're following a young woman who, after her parents have died, she is the oldest of her sisters, and she thought she had a marriage secured that would provide her with enough money to help care for her sisters and ensure that they still have a decent life. However, that marriage, that engagement gets canceled, and suddenly she has no idea what she's going to do or how she's going to provide for her sisters. And so she sets off to London to try and meet a rich man so that she can secure a marriage to help her family. And obviously, her intentions are pure, but that does mean that she's a fortune hunter, and she happens to find a family that's very, very well off, and she thinks, well, maybe I'll just flirt with the youngest son of this family and I'll try to win his heart. And it's going pretty well. He's very taken aback by all her compliments, and he's swept off his feet like, oh, this is the perfect woman for me. And then cue older brother who's like, who's this woman that wants our fortune? And the older brother can tell that she's after their money, and so he thinks that it's up to him to protect his family. So both those characters are doing what they think is best for their families. You understand why both of them are doing what they're doing, but it does mean that they end up butting heads. And then unsurprisingly, there's tension that turns into them realizing that I can only ever be honest with this person, and you know, cuteness unfolds. And I really liked how everything was executed. I enjoyed the characters, I enjoyed the tone, I enjoyed the commentary on this time period, the lack of freedoms granted to a lot of people based off of status, based off of gender, based off of their way in which they fit within society. So I think it captured all of that really well. And if you are a fan of slow burn, this is basically the slowest of burns, which I quite liked. So this one was really cute. What I was wanting from it, it delivered exceptionally well. So definitely really enjoyed, and thank you to the person who recommended this to me. The next book I don't plan to elaborate on much because it's been a favorite of mine for years. I have a lot of content associated with this particular series, and that would be Way of Kings. So I reread Way of Kings. I did a spoiler discussion with some friends, so I'll have that linked if you're interested, but that all I really have to say is this was fantastic on reread once again. And it's interesting going back through because how you experience a book when you're coming to it for a second time is always interesting. Some books, they lose a lot of their sparkle when you're reading it for a second time because it's the reveals and it's the way in which you are discovering things as you go that makes the book exciting. But then once you know all of that information, then it's not as captivating. Whereas Way of Kings, there's so many things, especially reading further into the series, you really start to see all the little details that are laid out along the way. And so I really enjoy getting to see that foreshadowing. And I can also appreciate the world building even more on reread because the first time it's like you're processing all this information. So when you come back to it, this is, okay, apologies for this very goofy analogy, but it's almost like if you've ever traveled to a place that you ended up really liking and you're like, wow, it was so beautiful. I had the best time, but there was all these things that I felt like, oh, I hope I can go back, because if I go back, I'll know exactly what to do to make the most of my trip and really get to explore everything that I didn't on this trip, or everything I wish I could have explored even more. And then if you do get that chance to go back to that place, then there's just that extra layer of enjoyment from, oh, here's the parts that I love, and here's this place that I really enjoyed, but then also here's this thing that I didn't get before. And that's kind of what it feels like coming back to Way of Kings. That's all I really need to say. It's great. I love Way of Kings. Yay for that reread. And then last, not the entire trilogy for The Arrows of the Queen, but the first book. I talked about it a lot because it was one of the first things I picked up this year, and then I read the whole trilogy and had discussed the trilogy as well. But the first book continues to be one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. I just thought that the way that we follow our character Talia as she comes from an abusive home to learning how to trust individuals, how to trust in herself, how to gain confidence, seeing how she develops throughout the story, and seeing the way a lot of the adult figures really support her and love her and help to take care of her and instill in her a really healthy mindset, both for how she's to treat others, how she's to interact with others, and how she's supposed to treat herself. I just thought it was beautiful. I thought it was beautiful. And there's just some really heartwarming moments in this first book of this trilogy. And I've said before that I didn't love the second and third books, so it was kind of a letdown to not love those as much. But if you are interested in trying this trilogy out, I would say at least give the first one a go. And if you're happy to stop there, and you could technically just read, there's going to be, of course, some things that are left where they're not as addressed as you would like by the end of a story. But I will say, because this series takes place within a large world, meaning there's a bunch of books in Valdemar, there are going to be things even by the end of this trilogy that are left unanswered. So you're kind of going to get that regardless of whether you read the whole trilogy or just the first book. But really, the first book it's so sweet. It's, in my opinion, the perfect coming of age type of story. Really loved it. I thought it was wonderful. That's it for my top 5 books of the year so far. Like I said, I will have a separate video for my favorite new releases, new fantasy releases specifically. And I would love to know also what were your thoughts on these books, but then also what have been some of your absolute favorite books of the year. And if you have some recommendations based off of the books that I really loved that you'd like to give, feel free, because I often find so many lovely books thanks to all of you. So I hope you're enjoying your reading so far this year. I hope that you're enjoying your year so far. Thanks so much for watching though, and I'll see you all later. Bye.